Hey, this week's parsha, besides being V'Yakal Pekudei, is also this week, it's Parshas Para, where we read about the Para Aduma, the red heifer in English. According to some opinions, it's brought down that reading Parshas Para and hearing Parshas Para is actually a biblical commandment. It's Mid'Oraisa. And the question that many puzzle over is why? Why would it be a biblical commandment, and what's the source? One of the explanations is, coming from the Rugas HaBaisim, that we find by the Egel, we actually, those who say the Sheish Schiris, we also actually mention it, you might not realize it. It says that you should remember, it says Zachar by the Egel, that you have to remember what we did to Hashem. The Midbar, meaning the Egel, it says Zachar over there. There you have to remember it, the Egel. However, we don't want to remember something negative. Making the Egel was something that we did that reflects very badly on the Jewish people. Therefore, instead of talking about the Egel, we talk about the Para Aduma, which is brought down that the Para Aduma, the mitzvah of the Para Aduma, both of them are cows, and the Para Aduma was, so to speak, the mother cow atoning for the child cow, for the Egel. And therefore, so the Para Aduma is, in a way, the atonement for the Egel. And therefore, even though we have to really talk about the Egel, but we talk about the Para Aduma, which is the atonement part of the Egel. And that way we have remembered the Egel, but we do it in a positive way. That's how some explain what it's brought down, that talking about the Para Aduma is, in this week's parsha, is biblical. However, as many point out, while that may be true, that may be nice that the Para Aduma atones for the Egel, we don't find anywhere while we're reading the Parshas Para that we have to be thinking about the Egel. We don't have to be thinking about the Egel, we're thinking about the Para Aduma. So it's true that there's a medrash that they're connected, but we don't think about that. So how are we accomplishing Zachar, remembering the Egel, if we don't even do that while we read Parshas Para? And therefore, others explain that there's a different source for reading Parshas Para, which would make it biblical. They say that when it comes to Parshas Para, it says V'daber Hashem Moshe Lamer, so on. Lamer. It says the word Lamer twice, means saying it over twice. And from there we learn out that not just Moshe has to repeat it to the Jewish people, but also we have to read it every time. And but that would still beg the question, why? And the reason for that, we can understand why we read Parshas Para this week. We read Parshas Para always the Shabbos before we read Parshas HaChedesh, which is what we're going to read next Shabbos. Parshas HaChedesh, which talks about HaChedesh Zelachem, the new month. That Nisan is the new month, and this is where Hashem gives them the first mitzvah. And we learn about the Karban Pesach, and so on. So Parsha Chedesh is always either the Shabbos that Mevarchim Nisan, or if Rish Chedesh is actually on Shabbos, like this year, so then we would read it on Shabbos. And then the Shabbos before that, we read Parshas Para. What's Parshas Para? Parshas Para is purifying someone who became Tamei Meis, who became Tamei because they came into contact with a dead body or a part of a dead body. And so you have to be tar, you have to purify yourself before you're going to bring the Karban Pesach, which is what you read in Parshas HaChedesh. And the lesson of that, of why even nowadays we're still reading Parshas Para, because that gives us hope and the faith and the trust that we're going to need this. We're going to have to do the whole parsha, Parshas Para, to purify ourselves in order to bring the Karban Pesach, hopefully this year. And in fact, there's an interesting thing that the Rambam, when he talks about Parshas Para Aduma, when he talks about all the halachas, so in middle, while he enumerates all the various the 9 Para Adumas that were made, he finishes off and says, "Va'asiri yasi melech HaMashiach," that Mashiach will make the 10th one. Even though, he says that it should be speedily in our days. And as many point out, this is very uncharacteristic of the Rambam, but the Rambam is teaching us, and we learn this from the laws of Para Aduma, that we always, when we're talking about Mashiach, there's always the hope, and we're always striving, always the trust that it will come any moment, and we will need it, even maybe this year, to be able to bring the paraduma and bring the carbon Pesach in purity. That's the word for this week. With regards to Tanya, so we were explaining the last while about the 10 spheres, 10 attributes that a person has, each soul has. Now, besides the attributes, there's also something, we may have heard the term many times, levushim, clothes, garments. They're called machshava, dibur, and maisa. Machshava is thought, dibur is speech, and maisa is action. And this is a theme that comes up constantly in Chassidus and in other places as well. The machshava, dibur, maisa, and we call them garments. As opposed to the spheres, which are attributes, which are characteristic part of the person, these are called garments. Why? Because it's just like a garment. A garment doesn't have any value for itself, but you put it on. And the same thing with the machshava, dibur, maisa of the person, his thought, his speech, or his action. The attributes, so to speak, enclose themselves in these three garments in order to do a mitzvah. Any mitzvah that you do in this world has to be done either through machshava, dibur, or maisa. Machshava is the thought, what you're thinking about, what you're actively thinking about. Not necessarily what makes sense, but what you're thinking about. Just to give a brief example. Let's say somebody's thinking about 5 plus 5 equals 20, which doesn't make sense, but if you're thinking about that, that's machshava. That's not logic, that's not seichel, that's machshava. No, just to show that they're two separate things. So there's machshava, what you're thinking about. There's dibur, speech, and action, what you do physically, what you do something. And any mitzvah has to be with one of these three, or more than one. There's the physical mitzvah, which is most mitzvahs are done with maisa. But then you have Torah, learning Torah. So you're supposed to do it with speech. You're supposed to not just think about it, but you're supposed to actually say it with your mouth. But at the same time, you're supposed to understand what you're saying. You're supposed to understand what you're learning. So that's with machshava. In other words, when it comes to doing mitzvahs, it's not enough to have a nice feeling inside yourself, have a great love for God, a great fear for God, which are mitzvahs in themselves. But you also they have to come out in one of these three garments, which these three garments are already bringing them down onto a lower level. A machshava is you're thinking about it. It could be to yourself, but it's already, in other words, revealing it to yourself. Dibur, you're revealing it to someone else. And maisa, it's even more separate from the person. At the same time, while we say the mitzvahs are done through machshava, dibur, maisa, we do say that in order for the mitzvah, as we learned previously, that for a mitzvah to have an existence, for it to continue to exist, for it not to evaporate, for your love, for the mitzvah to be a real thing, it has to be done with a love and a fear of God. You have to have feelings in the mitzvah. It's not enough to just do a physical mitzvah by rote. You have to have, with a warmth, with a chayis, with a lebedekai, with an energy, you have to do the mitzvah. And that's through the 10 attributes. That the first one is chesed, which is associated with avo, having a love for God. Gvura has to do with having a fear of God. So on the one hand, we say that you have to have these 10 attributes. You have to have this feeling, this emotion, in order that your Judaism, your mitzvah should be alive. They should have feeling to it. But at the same time, we say that you can't do a mitzvah without machshava, dibur, maisa. It has to have one of these three seemingly garments which have no value to themselves. Because the truth is, while the mitzvah has to be done with warmth and feeling for godliness, for God, at the same time, we have to remember, even our neshama, even our soul, at the end of the day, while we say it's a chelik al kamimal, it's literally a part of godliness, but at the end of the day, it is a creation. And it doesn't matter how high of a creation something is, even the highest of the high, it's limited and it can never grasp God. But it says that God put himself into the Torah, he put himself into the mitzvahs. Anonashi Ksavas Yahavas. He invested himself in the Torah and the mitzvahs. Therefore, it is by using our faculties, machshava dibur maisa, by learning God's wisdom, by doing a physical action that God invested himself in, that is really the only way to really connect ourselves to God. So while it may seem on the one hand, it's just an empty vessel if it doesn't have the fear or the love of God in it, this energy, this warmth, it doesn't have this love in the mitzvah that you're doing. But on the other hand, with just the warmth, you can't really grasp God, because this warmth, this emotion, or this intellectual understanding that you have of godliness is all limited based on the person's limitation. And the only way to grasp God, grasp him and become one and cleave to him, is in a way that God himself, so to speak, lets himself down, that we could cleave to it. And where did God let himself down? That is through the Torah, through the mitzvahs. He put himself into the Torah, his wisdom. The Torah is a godly wisdom. The mitzvahs are God's will. Through doing it, that's how we connect to and can cleave to God. And that's why it's important that any mitzvah has to be done through machshava, dibur, and maisa. That is for the Chassidic part. Going to now the halacha, short halacha. So we are right now, even though it was snowing, we're sort of getting into the time of year, which is, I guess we call it spring, although different places have different times that they get there. Sometimes we feel like we're going back and forth. Be as it may be, the question comes up every year, and especially when there's a bunch of people together in a room, in a shul, or somewhere else. Somebody wants the window open and somebody wants the window closed. So who gets the right of way? So the general rule is that during the winter, the person who wants it closed, the window closed, the air conditioner closed, the heater on, whatever it is, they get the right, and we follow them. Even if they're only one person. And in the summer, vice versa, the one who wants the window open, the air conditioner on, heater off, that person gets prime at first. We listen to them first. That's in the summer and the winter. The question is what's about the spring and the fall, where it's somewhere in the middle. When it's somewhere in the middle, so then the halacha is that you either have to come to consensus, figure it out, or even though it's the spring or the fall, different places, different climates are different, and so you follow what is this climate and this climate at this time of the year. Most people have it open, or most people have it closed. Now, this is all assuming that everybody is well and healthy, and it's just a question of should the window be open or closed. If someone is already not well, so then we go follow the person who's not well. At the same time, while we said that in the winter or the summer, the person who wants it closed or open, in the winter closed, the summer open, they get priority. But the guy can't be sitting in the summer with 5 sweaters and a coat and say he's hot and open the window and everybody else wants it closed. No, if he's wearing 5 coats, take them off, and then let's see if you are still gonna be hot. And the same thing in the winter. If the guy has a sweater, he could. Everybody else is wearing sweaters, and he wants to be in his short sleeves, and therefore he wants the window closed, while everybody else has their long sleeves or wearing sweaters, and therefore they want it open because it's not that cold of a day. So no, the person has to put on his sweater, and then we'll see how it goes from there. So although they get priority, but you first have to do what they're able to do. And obviously, while we were talking about this is what the technical law is, anybody who wants to give in and be nice, they are more than welcome. And on the contrary, that's the way to go. In other words, you don't have to say, oh, because it's the winter, have it closed, even though it's a warm day outside. It's not saying that the halacha is that the window needs to be closed. The halacha is that if you insist, we will follow what you're saying, but you should be nice if you're able to, and it's not a big deal, to yield to the other people's view. So just to wrap it up, we first said a vert. We explained two reasons why Parshas Para is according to some Midaraisa. One, we said that it's because to remember the Zachar that we say by the Egel, but we don't want to remember the Egel, the golden calf, which is something negative. So we remember the Para Aduma, which it says atoned for the Egel. So we're remembering the Egel, but in a positive way. Others say, if so, when we're reading Parshas Para, we should be thinking about the Egel. We don't do that. So they explain that it has to do with twice that it says Lamer in Parshas Chukas, and the reason we're reading it now is showing our faith and our trust that when we're reading Parshas, just like we're going to read Parshas Chedesh in the next Shabbos, which is about the Karban Pesach, we're bringing our trust that we're going to need to bring the Karban Pesach, and to do that we're going to have to purify ourselves, and therefore we read Parshas Par. In Tanya, we learned about Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, the three garments, which the three garments are different than the 10 spheres, the 10 attributes. That the three garments are like garments, something that you put on, but they're put on, and to do any mitzvah has to be done through these three garments. And although we said that in order for the mitzvah to be done with energy, with life, with zest, it has to have love and fear of God. But at the same time, we said it doesn't matter how high, how much love and how much fear of God you have, that's all a person is limited. And the only way to truly grasp God is, it says, God invested himself in the Torah and in his will and the mitzvahs, and it's through doing them, through Machshava Dibur Ma'aseh, thought, action, and speech, that we're able to truly grasp God, because God himself invested himself in those things. And when we think about something in Torah, so it's in our brains. When we speak about Torah, we're actually speaking God's wisdom. And when we're doing something, we're doing God's action, God's will. And then we finished off with halacha about the closed or open window. And we said in the winter, the guy who is cold gets precedence. In the summer, the guy who's hot gets precedence. When it's between spring or fall, so you either have to come to some consensus or figure out what the normal thing is in this specific area, specific climate. We said all of this is assuming that everybody is well, Baruch Hashem. If someone is not well, we would give that person precedence. And of course, this is all talking about what the letter of the law is, and everybody is encouraged, if you're able to, obviously, and it's not a big deal, to yield to the other people. Have a good night.